It's strange how a few words can burn through years of love, like fire through dry paper. I still remember that afternoon vividly, the way the light spilled across the living room, soft and golden, as if mocking the storm that was about to unfold inside me. My son Daniel and his wife Clara had come over for Sunday lunch. It used to be our family tradition, but lately it had turned into something more like a duty. Clara always arrived with her perfume first, sharp, expensive, and overwhelming. She looked perfect, as always. Hair in soft waves, nails freshly done, that faint air of superiority that followed her like a shadow. My son adored her. I tried to, too. But that day, it was clear she didn't come for peace. I had spent the morning preparing everything: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, apple pie, all his childhood favorites. The smell filled the house, bringing back memories of simpler times when Daniel would run into the kitchen with muddy shoes, asking for an extra slice of pie before dinner. I smiled at the memory, unaware that by the end of the day, those memories would be all I had left unbroken. We sat down for lunch. Daniel complimented the meal, but Clara barely touched her plate. She looked around the dining room, her eyes scanning the shelves, the curtains, the old china that once belonged to my grandmother. "You really haven't changed anything since Daniel was a kid, have you?" she said, her voice light but cutting. I forced a small smile. "Some things don't need changing. They hold memories." She chuckled quietly. "Memories or junk?" Daniel looked up from his plate, uncomfortable. "Clara?" But she continued. "I mean, really, these old curtains, that creaky chair, all these dusty antiques. Daniel and I were talking last night about how this place feels stuck in time. It's like a museum of old junk." I froze. I felt my heart twist, but I said nothing. Years of motherhood had taught me silence can be louder than words. Clara smiled at me then. That kind of smile that isn't kindness, but triumph disguised as politeness. Daniel tried to shift the conversation, but the damage was done. Every word after that felt hollow. I looked around the table at the things she had just called junk. The heirloom china, the photographs, the clock my late husband fixed over and over, just so I wouldn't have to buy a new one. Everything that built our family, our memories, our story, reduced to junk. After lunch, they went upstairs to rest. I stayed behind, cleaning the table slowly, my hands trembling. I didn't cry. Not yet. When they left later that evening, Clara hugged me quickly, a perfunctory gesture, and said, "You really should think about modernizing this place. Maybe let go of some old things." When the door closed behind them, I stood in the silence of the house that once held laughter and warmth. My reflection stared back at me from the kitchen window. Tired, wrinkled, worn out. For the first time in my life, I felt like maybe she was right. Maybe I was old junk too. That night, I barely slept. I walked through every room, touching the things that had once made this house a home. Each object whispered a story. The rocking chair where I nursed Daniel as a baby, the chipped vase from our 10th anniversary, the worn-out piano that hadn't been played since my husband passed. They weren't just things. They were echoes of a life fully lived. But Clara couldn't see that. She only saw dust. And maybe that's what hurt the most. Not the insult itself, but the realization that my son didn't defend me. The next morning, as the sun rose through the faded curtains, I decided something. I wasn't going to argue, beg, or complain. I was going to do exactly what she said. I was going to let go of the old things, but not in the way she imagined. As I brewed my morning coffee, I felt a strange calmness settle over me, the kind that comes right before a storm. I pulled out a notepad and began writing a list. Every item Clara had mocked, every heirloom she had rolled her eyes at. By noon, I had made up my mind. If she thought my memories were junk, maybe it was time for her to live without them entirely. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was clarity, and I knew exactly how to find it. After that Christmas dinner, something inside me shifted. I started noticing the way Emma's tone changed when she spoke to me. Her politeness had vanished, replaced with an almost patronizing patience, as though she were tolerating me in her home rather than welcoming me. "Mom, you really don't have to bring anything when you come over," she said once, smiling tight-lipped as I handed her a small tin of my homemade cookies. "We're trying to keep the house healthy, you know. Less sugar." "Oh, I thought Ethan liked these," I replied softly. "He used to," she said, glancing at him. "But we've grown out of that kind of stuff." That phrase, "grown out of," cut deeper than I let on. It wasn't just cookies. It was like she was saying they'd outgrown me. I started visiting less. I told myself it was to give them space as newlyweds. But truthfully, it was because I felt like an intruder in my own son's life. When I did visit, Emma always seemed to have a subtle way of reminding me that everything in their home was hers. Her taste, her decisions, her rules. I remember one afternoon vividly. I dropped by to bring over some old family photo albums I thought Ethan might want to keep. Inside were pictures of him as a boy, his father holding him up at the beach, the first house we ever bought, our old Labrador. Emma picked up one of the albums, flipped through a few pages, and said with a small laugh, "Wow, this is really old stuff." "Old stuff," Ethan chuckled lightly, probably not realizing how that sounded to me. "Yeah, Mom, you really kept everything. I thought you'd like to have them," I said. "They're part of our history." Emma shrugged. "We're more into minimalism now. We don't really keep clutter." She placed the album on the table, like it was something that didn't belong. That was the moment the label formed in my mind. Old junk. Maybe she didn't say it aloud then, but it was in her tone, in her look. I could feel it like a whisper in the air. And in the weeks that followed, she did start using that phrase. It began innocently enough when I offered to give them my old dining set after remodeling my kitchen. "Oh no," she said with that same tight smile. "We don't want to take on any old junk." Ethan laughed again, but I could see in his eyes that he was uncomfortable. He didn't correct her. He never did. That night, I cried quietly in my living room, surrounded by furniture that held decades of memories. I thought about how I used to picture growing old with a family that cared about traditions, that valued where they came from. But apparently, what I saw as memories, they saw as junk. Still, I loved my son too much to stay bitter. I told myself she was just young, that maybe I was being oversensitive. So when their first anniversary came around, I decided to do something thoughtful, something that would remind them what love and effort truly meant. I went to their house early that morning, carrying a beautifully wrapped box. Inside were items I had kept from Ethan's childhood: his baby blanket, his father's engraved watch, and a small photo frame of our family from when he was 5. Emma opened the door in her robe, surprised. "Oh, hi, Nancy." I smiled. "Happy anniversary. I brought you something special." She took the box, but I could see the faint flicker of annoyance in her eyes. "Thanks. You didn't have to do that." "I wanted to," I said warmly. "These are memories worth keeping." That evening, I got a text from Ethan. Just one line. "Mom, maybe next time check with us before bringing over sentimental stuff. Emma doesn't really want to keep all that." I stared at the message for a long time. No thank you. No appreciation. Just another dismissal. That night, I didn't sleep. Something had broken. Not just between me and Emma, but between me and the son I'd raised with every ounce of love in my being. I started thinking about all the things I'd stored in my attic, gifts I had saved for years, the china set my husband and I received at our wedding, the antique vase from my grandmother, the crystal figurines Emma had once admired when she first visited my home. And then, a week later, Emma called. Her tone was brisk. "Nancy, we're doing some redecorating. I know you've been keeping some of the wedding gifts here. You can just drop them off next time you're around." "Wedding gifts?" I asked, confused. "Yeah," she said. "The ones we didn't take right away after the wedding? We figured we'd finally find space for them." "Oh, I see," I said quietly. "Sure, I'll bring them over." But that night, something in me shifted again. Only this time, it wasn't sadness. It was something firmer. For years, I had bent backward to keep the peace, to avoid being the overbearing mother-in-law. But every kindness had been met with indifference, every gesture twisted into intrusion. They called my memories old junk. And now they wanted their wedding gifts. Gifts that had been sitting in my home for over a year, untouched, unopened. So I decided I'd give them something far more valuable, something that would teach them what value really meant. The next morning, I packed the gifts carefully. The boxes were covered in a light layer of dust, but still neatly stacked. I opened each one, looking at the notes attached. For Ethan and Emma, wishing you a lifetime of happiness. They were beautiful things, fine porcelain, crystal, silverware, gifts from people who believed in lasting love. And one by one, I loaded them into my car. But instead of driving to Ethan's house, I drove to the local charity donation center. The man at the counter smiled as I unloaded the boxes. "Wow, ma'am, these are some fine pieces." I smiled back. "They are. Someone out there will appreciate them more than the people who have them now." By the time I left, I felt a strange calmness wash over me. It wasn't revenge. It was release. I had given up trying to be accepted by people who saw me as a burden. Of course, I knew it wouldn't stay secret for long. 3 days later, Ethan called. His voice was tense. "Mom, where are the wedding gifts? Emma says you still haven't brought them." I took a breath. "Oh, I dropped them off." "Dropped them off? Where?" "At the donation center." There was a long silence, then a sharp intake of breath. "You? What?" I smiled softly, even though he couldn't see it. "They were just old junk, right?" The silence stretched. Then came the words I'd been waiting for. Words that weren't anger, but realization. "Mom, what did you do?" Ethan's voice trembled between shock and disbelief. "Mom, please tell me you're joking." I leaned back on my old couch, my heart oddly steady. "No, I'm not joking, Ethan. I donated them." There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Emma's voice in the background, sharp, demanding. "What did she say? Where are they?" "She said she donated them," Ethan snapped back at her, his voice rising for the first time in years. "Donated?" I could practically hear Emma's outrage spill through the phone. "Those were our wedding gifts." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of her words, but also their irony. Our gifts. The same gifts they'd left forgotten in dusty boxes. The same ones they didn't bother to look at for more than a year. I didn't respond immediately. I let them feel the silence. Ethan's tone softened then, almost pleading. "Mom, those things were valuable. We could have used them. You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted calmly, "because when something sits untouched for over a year, gathering dust, it's not a gift anymore. It's clutter. And I thought you two didn't like keeping old junk." The line went dead silent. For a few seconds, I thought maybe he'd hung up. But then I heard his breathing, uneven, conflicted. "Mom, Emma didn't mean it like that," he said finally, his tone weary. She just has her own way of saying things." "I know," I said quietly. "And I have my own way of doing things." He sighed deeply. "She's furious right now. Those gifts, some of them were from her side of the family. Her aunt gave her that silver tea set, and now it's gone." "I see," I said. "Then maybe her aunt will be pleased to know that her gift is bringing joy to someone who'll actually use it." "Mom, please don't make this worse," he muttered. I didn't answer. The conversation had ended in my heart long before he called. For years, I had tried to be gentle, understanding, patient. I had swallowed disrespect and dressed it up as misunderstanding. But that day, something inside me snapped back into alignment. I wasn't angry. I wasn't hurt. I was simply free. Later that evening, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and watched the sunset spread like soft fire over the horizon. The neighborhood was quiet, except for the faint sound of children laughing in the distance. I thought about my late husband, Robert, how he would have handled all this. He was the calm one, the kind of man who always believed people eventually came around if you gave them enough love. Maybe he was right. Or maybe, sometimes, love needs boundaries to survive. The next morning, there was a loud knock on my door. I opened it to find Ethan standing there, his jaw tight, eyes clouded with guilt and frustration. Emma stood behind him, arms folded, lips pursed, like she was sucking on a lemon. "Mom," Ethan started. "Can we talk?" "Of course," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." Emma brushed past me without a word and sat stiffly on the couch. She didn't look around, didn't smile, didn't even remove her sunglasses. Ethan remained standing, rubbing the back of his neck. "We didn't mean to upset you, but giving away our gifts, that was over the line." I sat opposite them. "You called me and the things I value old junk. I thought I'd do you a favor and clear some of it out." Emma finally spoke then, her voice sharp as glass. "That was sarcasm, not a favor. Those gifts were ours." "Yes," I said, keeping my voice even. "Yours, which you left in my house for over a year without a single word. You made it clear you didn't care about anything old or sentimental. So I treated them the way you treat everything that doesn't fit your version of perfection." Ethan exhaled, frustration etched across his face. "Mom, come on. You know it's not like that." "Isn't it?" I asked softly. "Do you even realize how many times you've let her belittle the things I care about? How many times I've walked away humiliated just to keep peace?" He didn't answer. Emma shifted uncomfortably, her defensiveness cracking for just a second. "You both wanted a life free from the past," I continued. "So I set you free from it." Emma crossed her arms tighter. "You know what? I think this whole thing was about control. You couldn't handle that Ethan has his own household now, so you had to make a statement." I looked her dead in the eyes. "No, Emma. This was about respect. Something you haven't learned yet." Ethan closed his eyes, his hand pressed to his temple. "Can we just stop?" he muttered. "Please." For a moment, the room fell silent, except for the ticking of the old clock on the wall, a clock Emma had once called ancient. Finally, I stood. "You're adults now. You have your life. I'm not asking for your approval, or your company, or your understanding. I'm done trying to fit into a space where I'm treated like clutter." Ethan looked up, eyes glistening. "Mom?" I shook my head gently. "I'll always love you, Ethan. That won't change. But love isn't about allowing people to shrink you until you disappear." Emma stood abruptly. "I can't do this," she muttered. "We came here to talk, not to be guilt-tripped." "Then maybe you should start listening instead of talking," I said calmly. She stormed toward the door, her heels clicking against the floor like angry punctuation marks. Ethan hesitated for a moment, torn between his wife and his mother. Then, quietly, he followed her out. When the door closed, the house was silent again. I waited for tears to come, but they didn't. Instead, I felt an unexpected peace. I went upstairs, opened my closet, and began taking out things I hadn't touched in years. Old linens, books, trinkets. Some I kept, some I packed for donation. I realized that by letting go of those wedding gifts, I'd started something deeper. I wasn't just giving away objects. I was shedding the weight of being unappreciated. A week passed before I heard from Ethan again. He came by alone this time. His shoulders slumped, his voice softer. "Mom," he said, "Emma's still upset, but I get why you did it." I looked at him carefully. "Do you?" He nodded. "Yeah. She's been talking about how we need to start over, get new things, new memories. I think it's her way of dealing with how different our lives are now. But maybe she went too far." I smiled faintly. "Maybe we all did." He reached into his pocket and handed me a small wrapped box. "This is for me, not her." I opened it slowly. Inside was a simple silver frame with a photo of us from years ago, taken at the beach. My hair was wild. He was laughing, and Robert was holding a kite behind us. "I found this in one of your albums," he said. "I figured it belonged with you." For a second, my throat tightened. "Thank you, Ethan." He smiled, looking down. "I just wanted you to know. Not everything old is junk." I reached out and squeezed his hand. "No, son," I said softly. "Some things are priceless." The days that followed were quiet, peaceful even. I spent mornings tending to my garden, something I hadn't done properly in months. The air was cool, the soil rich, and every bloom that opened felt like a little reminder that life keeps moving forward no matter who chooses to walk beside you. Ethan started visiting more often after that. Sometimes, He came by after work just to sit on the porch and talk. He didn't bring Emma with him, and I didn't ask why. There was an unspoken understanding between us that, for now, it was better that way. One evening, as we sat together watching the sun dip behind the maple trees, he broke the silence. "Mom," he said quietly, "you know she's not a bad person. She just sees the world differently." I nodded slowly. "I know, Ethan. I don't think she's evil. Just lost in a world where everything new shines brighter than everything that lasts." He sighed. "She grew up around people who measured worth by appearances. How new your house is. How expensive your car is. She doesn't understand sentimental value. She never had to." I looked at him carefully. "And do you?" He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I think I'm starting to." We both laughed softly. It wasn't the loud, carefree laughter we once shared, but it was something real, something that carried the weight of understanding. After he left that night, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the photo he'd given me. It felt like a bridge, fragile but real, between what we were and what we could still be. A week later, I received a call from a local charity organization. The woman on the line thanked me for my recent donation, explaining how the items I'd given, those so-called old junk, had helped several struggling families furnish their homes. She told me about a young mother who cried when she received the tea set, saying it reminded her of her late grandmother. Another family used the elegant dishes to serve their first home-cooked meal in years. I listened, a lump forming in my throat. When she finished, I said softly, "Thank you for telling me that." After hanging up, I sat in silence. The house bathed in soft afternoon light. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. Those items didn't just collect dust anymore. They were alive again, in new hands, creating new memories. The next day, I decided to pay a visit to one of the charity centers myself. The volunteer recognized me immediately and showed me around. I saw the tea set displayed in a small kitchen, a couple of the decorative vases placed neatly on a windowsill, catching the light. It was beautiful, not in the glossy, magazine perfect way Emma admired, but in the way that comes from stories and use, from meaning. As I stood there, one of the staff members approached me with a smile. "You know," she said, "you'd be surprised how many people cry when they get things like these. They're not just objects to them, they're symbols of hope." I smiled back. That's all I wanted. When I returned home, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. It was from Ethan. Inside was a letter, handwritten, something he hadn't done since high school. "Mom, I've been thinking about everything. About you, about Emma, about what really matters. I realized you weren't trying to hurt us. You were trying to teach us something we forgot along the way. Emma's been quiet lately. She won't admit it, but I think she feels guilty. She told me she's been seeing how happy some of the donation stories made people online. The charity posted about it on their page. It's been shared hundreds of times. Your old junk is inspiring people, Mom. I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry for not standing up for you when I should have. I promise I'll do better. Love, Ethan." I read it twice, then a third time. My eyes blurred with tears I didn't even realize I'd been holding back. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. A message from Ethan popped up. "Emma wants to talk. Would you be open to that?" I hesitated for a moment. The old me would have jumped at the chance, desperate to patch things up. But this time, I wanted to make sure it was for the right reasons. "If she's ready to talk respectfully, then yes," I replied. He responded almost instantly. "She is. She said she owes you an apology." The next afternoon, there was another knock on my door. I opened it to find Emma standing there, alone this time. Her eyes looked tired, softer. She wasn't wearing her usual layers of confidence or makeup, just jeans and a sweater. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I nodded and stepped aside. For a few moments, we stood in the living room in awkward silence. Then she spoke, her voice shaky but sincere. "I was wrong," she said, "about everything. I said awful things to you, and I can't take them back. But I need you to know, I didn't understand what those things meant to you. I grew up in a world where emotions were secondary. I thought value came from price tags, not memories. And I hurt you because I couldn't see past that. Her words hung heavy in the air. I studied her face and saw no arrogance this time, only humility and regret. I walked closer and said softly, "You know, Emma, it's never about the objects. It's about the stories attached to them. You don't have to understand all of them. You just have to respect that they matter to someone." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I do now." We stood in silence for a moment before she whispered, "I'm sorry, truly." Something inside me eased. Maybe forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. Maybe it was about freeing yourself from the weight of anger. "I forgive you," I said simply. "Let's start fresh." She exhaled shakily, relief washing over her face. "Thank you." We sat together, talking for almost an hour. She told me about her upbringing, her fears of never being enough, and how seeing the charity post made her realize what she'd lost: gratitude. Before leaving, she said softly, "I'd like to help you volunteer there. Maybe learn what real value feels like." That made me smile. "I'd like that, Emma." When she left, the house felt different. Not emptier, but lighter. It wasn't just about gifts or pride anymore. It was about healing what had been broken. Between generations, between hearts, between what's old and what's new. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most valuable thing of all. The following week, I met Emma and Ethan at the charity center on a bright Saturday morning. It was bustling with volunteers carrying boxes, greeting families, and sorting donations. The air smelled faintly of fresh coffee and new beginnings. Emma looked nervous but determined. She wore a simple apron and tied her hair back, ready to help. When one of the coordinators asked if we'd like to assist with sorting donated items, she stepped forward immediately. "I'd love to," she said with a small smile. Watching her carefully unpack items and handle them gently was surreal. A few weeks ago, she couldn't bear to touch anything old. Now, she treated every object like it held a story waiting to be rediscovered. Ethan joined her, and soon, laughter began to fill the space around them. A quiet, genuine laughter that felt like a bridge finally being rebuilt. One of the volunteers approached me and whispered, "You've got a good son, and a daughter-in-law who's trying." I smiled. "Yes," I said softly. "They're both learning." As the morning went on, a woman walked into the center holding a small box. She looked familiar, though I couldn't place her at first. Then, as she drew closer, recognition hit me. It was the woman who had received the tea set I donated. She looked emotional as she approached. "You're the one who gave this?" she said, opening the box to reveal the tea set, polished and gleaming. "I just wanted to thank you. My mother passed away last year, and when I saw this set, it reminded me of her. I've been using it every Sunday for family breakfast. It feels like she's still with me." Her words pierced something deep inside me. I reached out, my fingers brushing the delicate porcelain. "I'm so glad it found the right home," I said quietly. When she left, I turned to find Emma standing a few steps behind me, her eyes glassy. "That's beautiful," she whispered. "You gave her back a piece of her mother, and I tried to throw that away." I didn't respond immediately. I just smiled and said, "Sometimes it takes losing something to understand what it was worth." Later that afternoon, we all had lunch together at a nearby cafe. It felt normal again. Ethan talked about his work. Emma shared stories from her childhood. And for the first time in a long while, there was no bitterness, no tension, just conversation. When we finished, Ethan looked at me seriously. "Mom, we've been talking about something." He reached for Emma's hand. "We want you to move in with us. Not because we feel guilty, because we want you there." I blinked, caught off guard. "Ethan, that's kind, but—" Emma interrupted softly. "Please, you don't know how much I've learned from you already. I'd love for our kids, when we have them, to know the kind of strength and grace you have." For a moment, I couldn't find words. I'd spent months, years even, feeling like an unwanted presence in their lives. To hear those words now, it healed something I didn't even realize was still hurting. Finally, I said, "Let's take it one step at a time. But thank you, both of you." As we stepped outside, sunlight filtered through the trees, painting everything in gold. Life felt full again. That evening, back at home, I sat in my favorite chair by the window. The same chair Ethan used to curl up beside as a child when we read bedtime stories. I pulled out a notebook and began writing something I hadn't written in years. A letter. To my future grandchildren, if you ever find this letter, I want you to remember something. Life isn't about how shiny or new things are. It's about the stories that live within them, the hands that held them, the hearts that gave them meaning. One day, someone might call the things you love old junk. Don't listen. Because sometimes, those are the things that remind us who we are. I signed it, folded it neatly, and placed it inside the photo album Ethan had given me. A week later, I invited Ethan and Emma over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and that old recipe my mother taught me. When they arrived, Emma immediately offered to help set the table. She handled the dishes with care, even using one of the few pieces I'd kept from the donation, the silver serving bowl. I thought this was gone, Ethan said with a grin. Not everything old needs to be replaced, I said, smiling. As we sat down to eat, I noticed how the light hit their faces, the comfort, the quiet love, the understanding that had taken root between us. Halfway through dinner, Emma reached for my hand. I have to say this, she said softly. I used to think strength meant control, but watching how you handled everything, your calm, your dignity, it made me realize real strength is knowing when to let go and when to forgive. Her words brought tears to my eyes. I squeezed her hand. And forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing peace over pride. After dinner, Ethan helped me wash the dishes while Emma looked through the photo album on the coffee table. I watched her turn each page with careful hands, pausing at a photo of me holding baby Ethan in that same kitchen decades ago. She looked up, smiling. You were beautiful. I laughed softly. Was? She chuckled, shaking her head. You are beautiful, and I'm lucky to have you as family. It was simple, but those words meant everything. When they left that night, Emma hugged me tightly, a real hug, full of warmth. See you soon, Mom, she said before getting in the car. I stood by the window long after they drove off, the evening sky painted in deep purple and gold. The world outside was quiet, but inside, I felt alive. They had called my memories old junk. They had tried to throw away the things that carried my life stories. But in the end, those very stories brought them back home. Not just to my house, but to their own hearts. Maybe that's what life is. A constant reminder that everything we love leaves an imprint. And even when,